When I was younger, each and almost every New Year, my family would pack the car and go on a road trip to visit family in Mexico. We never had any problems until one particular trip when I was 8. Like every road trip before, we left our home in North Texas around 6 p.m. in order to reach our destination the next morning, around 2 a.m. We crossed into Mexico, and this is where things got weird. When you're on the only stretch of freeway in the middle of the desert, you don't tend to freak out about having the same car behind you for miles. It was practically pitch black outside of our car windows, the only visible shapes being the dotted stars and the eerie silhouettes of cacti. We had been in Mexico for about an hour and still had a few more to drive. I remember sleeping but still being semi-conscious of what was going on around me, because I really don't have the skill to really fall asleep in a car. So when my mother suddenly spoke my dad's name, I heard her. "Miguel, that car behind us. It's been behind us since we left Laredo." My dad peeked at the car and shrugged off my mother's tension. "Lots of cars use this road. He's probably going to Reynosa or another city." And he left it at that. Despite his reassurance, my mom kept a weary eye on the car behind us. By this time, my siblings and I were hyper-aware of the car and entertained ourselves by watching the car through the gaps in the luggage that was blocking the rear window. We got tired of that pretty quick. "He's getting closer," my mother noted, and we all turned to watch the car inch closer and closer to ours. "He's too close, Miguel." And she was right. By this time, the car was practically pressed against the rear of our car. On a lonely stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, with a few hours until daylight, it was downright scary. We couldn't do much. My dad didn't slow down, didn't stop, and he didn't speed away either. He just drove, and the car followed. The next 30 minutes were the most tense we had ever experienced. The car would ease off sometimes, only to press its blinding headlights against our rear once more, like he knew he was freaking us out, and enjoying it. It was during one of the periods that the car had pulled away that Mom spotted a police car up ahead, parked on the side of the road, and she didn't miss a beat. "Miguel, pull over right now in front of the police." And he did. The car kept driving. I wonder how confused the policeman must have been as he watched my dad park the car right in front of him. The policeman came over and asked what was wrong, and my mother urgently told him everything. The car, the way it followed us and taunted us. The policeman took her claims very seriously and told us how people were victimized and had their cars stolen on these empty highways by thugs and criminals. He then offered to drive behind us for a while to make us feel safe. We drove off with the police cruiser behind us, relieved, until about 10 minutes later, when we saw something that confirmed the policeman's words and my mother's worst fears. We saw the car that had followed us pulled over on the side of the road, waiting.
My husband Jerry and I went on a road trip last summer. It was Jerry's idea, but I went along with it because I knew we were having some trouble in our marriage. I wasn't too excited about driving across the Southwest, but if Jerry thought that a trip would help us connect, I figured I'd go along with it and see what happens. Right away, I regretted the decision. The AC wasn't working right, and our radio was either static or awful country music stations. It was just all around unpleasant. I tried to talk to Jerry about little things like movies or music or our families, but every conversation devolved into awkward silence. I could tell that there was something on his mind, something he didn't want to tell me about. By midday, we decided to stop at a KFC in the middle of nowhere for lunch. I wasn't really in the mood for fried food, but it was the only option for miles, so that's where we went. We pulled into the parking lot. It was completely empty except for our car. The restaurant was also empty. A large woman was manning the front counter, but otherwise it was just me and Jerry. The woman greeted us, acting a little surprised to have customers, and Jerry ordered for both of us. I sat at one of the booths and waited for Jerry to bring back our drinks. He got a Diet Coke and I got a lemonade. Just like before, we sat in silence. "Jerry," I finally said, "are you happy?" He flinched at the question. "Why would you ask that?" "Are you?" I tried again. It was a simple question, but he looked away. He behaved like that sometimes. If he didn't want to say anything, he'd just stare at his feet until I dropped the subject. But I wasn't going to drop it this time. I knew that something was bugging him, and I needed to find out what. "Is it something I did?" I asked. "No!" he shouted. "Then what?" He sighed, sounding like a party balloon as it slowly deflates. Then he looked back at me, and his eyes were filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's not you, I've been having nightmares lately. They won't stop. I thought that maybe if we traveled somewhere, I'd be free of these thoughts, but I don't think it's working." This was news to me. He always seemed like he slept peacefully. In the mornings, he always acted relaxed and well-rested. "What kind of nightmares?" I asked. He went back to looking at his feet. It's weird. I dream that people are after me. They want to kill me." "Why?" "I don't know," he said. His voice was shaky and cracked. "They seem normal at first, but then their eyes turn completely black and they go crazy. I know it sounds stupid, but..." I reached across the table and held his hands. "It's not crazy," I said. "How long has this been going on?" Before he answered, he looked back up at me. Then he noticed that the woman was standing by our table, setting the trays of food in front of us. He turned towards her and instantly started screaming. He pulled his hands away from me and jumped out of his seat. I'd never seen someone so afraid before. He stared at that woman like she was some horrible, demonic thing. I tried to tell him to calm down, but I don't think he heard me. He ran across the restaurant and out of the door. I watched through the windows as he raced past our car and disappeared into the empty field behind the parking lot. "What the hell?" the woman said. I didn't have time to answer her. I jumped out of my seat and ran after him. As soon as I got outside, the desert heat hit me like a slap in the face. I ran through the parking lot trying to follow Jerry's steps. I made it into the open field, but I couldn't see him anywhere. I spent about 10 minutes looking around and shouting his name, but there was no sign of him. He was gone. I pulled out my phone and called his number, but it just went to voicemail. I was starting to get really worried. The highway rolled on in either direction, and empty space all around me seemed to go on forever. Everything was so flat and featureless. There was no place for Jerry to hide, and yet I couldn't see him. Eventually, I went back to the KFC where the lady was still waiting. She looked very confused. I explained that Jerry got spooked and ran off. I didn't know what else to say. She forced a smile and said he'd come back. After all, there was no place for him to go, no place for Miles. I called the police, and they didn't arrive until 30 minutes later. I explained what happened, and they said they'd put out a search for him. In the meantime, there was a motel about 50 miles away that I could check into and wait until he showed up. I guess I was in shock because I don't remember anything else until I parked in front of that motel. Anyways, I checked in for the night. I was the only customer. The next day, I didn't hear anything from the police, so I drove back to that KFC to see if anyone had seen him. Once again, the restaurant was empty except for the large woman at the counter, the one that had spooked Jerry so badly. She saw me and smiled, but I could tell that she didn't have any news for me. She asked if I knew why Jerry had run away like that, and I said that I had no idea. He was just having nightmares. As soon as I said that, I could have sworn that her eyes turned all black. Just for a second. It happened so fast that I didn't know if it was real or just my own imagination. I got in my car and left. It's been 3 days since this happened. The police still haven't found Jerry. I'm still at that motel waiting for him to turn back up. And last night, I had a nightmare about that woman. Her eyes were pure black, and she was running after me. Honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm scared. I think that maybe Jerry was right. Maybe there are people out there. People that want to hurt us. God, what should I do?
When I was in college, I had a very strange friend. These days, he's more of an enemy than a friend, but anyway, his name is Kevin. He was a fanatic who was obsessed with scorpions, and he only wore clothes with scorpions on them from head to toe. He said he kept all kinds of scorpions in his home and often brought live scorpions to school to surprise his friends. One day, I decided to go to his house with some friends to hang out, but that was the beginning of a disaster. When we arrived at his house, we were really surprised. His house was quite large, he lived alone, and there were numerous terrariums filled with scorpions. We looked at the scorpions of various sizes and colors for a while. Then Kevin asked us what we wanted to eat, and I suddenly got playful and said, "I want to eat fried scorpions." Then the friends all burst into laughter, and Kevin also smiled brightly. We decided to order pizza, and after eating and playing video games, we were about to go home. As our friends were heading out, Kevin grabbed my shoulder and asked me to stay a little longer. I said okay, and my friends left first. But shortly after that, my eyesight went dark and I collapsed. When I opened my eyes, my hands and feet were tied and I was in a closed room. I screamed as loud as I could, and after a while, Kevin came running. When I swore at him and asked what he was doing, he said, "My children are so angry because of what you said earlier that they are raising their tails. Look." Then he started bringing terrariums full of scorpions in front of me. Soon, dozens of various scorpions were placed in front of me, and he said, "You're my friend, so I'll only sting you 3 times. Choose 3 of these scorpions. Among these children, some are very poisonous and some are only a little. Try and guess whose poison is weaker." I was livid and shouted that I would kill all of his scorpions, but he picked up one scorpion and said, "Before that, think about which scorpions are not poisonous." The scorpion's tail attempted to sting me right before my eyes, and my whole body was drenched in sweat from the extreme fear. I tried to cajole him, but he wouldn't listen to me and told me that if I didn't pick a scorpion in 1 minute, he would pick it himself. I ended up choosing one. Then he held the scorpion against my bound hand, and the scorpion stung my hand with its tail. And then a tremendous pain came over me. I shouted out in agony. He said with a smile, "It was a good choice. This child is poisonous, but not dangerously so. How is it? It's still the first round, so you can survive, right?" I howled. He checked my pulse and asked me to choose the second scorpion. I hesitated, but he threatened me again by holding a scorpion in front of me, and so I ended up choosing one. When this scorpion stung my hand, I felt even more pain than before, and I was struggling to catch my breath. I screamed for help. Kevin said while examining my pupils, "You're still okay, but that kid you just picked is a very poisonous one. It's so exciting to see people being poisoned right in front of my eyes. Please hold on and don't die. There's still 1 round left." I cried and screamed that I couldn't breathe, and he just laughed crazily. I begged him to save me, and he said, "Such a pity, but I can't help it. There's still 1 more scorpion player left, so choose the last one carefully." I ended up picking one, and again the scorpion stung me, and although it hurt, there were no serious symptoms. "You just picked a kid who wasn't very poisonous. You're lucky." Kevin clapped his hands and left the room, and I fainted. When I woke up, what must have been hours later, Kevin was sitting in front of me. As he handed me a wad of cash, he said, "Now, here's $1,000. This is my thanks for a really fun show today. Don't even think about reporting it to the police. I would just tell them that you got stung while handling a scorpion by yourself." I nodded at him to pretend to cooperate. Then he said happily, "Good. I think my kid's anger has calmed down a bit now." He then released me and I went straight to the hospital. I managed to recover after receiving treatment. After a few days, I couldn't hold back my anger and decided to get revenge on him. So I contacted him and asked him to do the Scorpion show one more time. He obliged and asked me to come to his house. I went to his house, knocked, and as soon as he opened the door, I punched him in the face with all my might. He fell backwards and crawled towards the scorpion terrariums. I chased him and beat him like crazy. He was so stuck in a stupor that he couldn't get up from the floor. I took a knife from his kitchen and stabbed all the scorpions to death. Kevin cried, and I returned home. After that, he didn't come to school again, and no one saw or heard from him. I don't know what he's doing now. I just hope I never run into him again.
This happened late one night, when I was driving back home from work, on a dark and lonely highway. It was the kind of night that makes you wish that you were at home relaxing, instead of being out on the road. There were no other cars in sight, and by happenstance, I was driving through dark territory, meaning that there was no reception on my phone. I'd been driving for quite some time, and was starting to zone out a little bit. That's not to say that I was falling asleep behind the wheel. I was just sort of on autopilot. As I rounded a bend, I saw a semi-truck parked on the side of the road ahead of me. Not really anything out of the ordinary. Truckers will sometimes park off to the side to catch some shut-eye during their long trips across the country. But there was something about this truck that unnerved me. I got the feeling that whoever was behind the wheel wasn't resting. They were waiting. I slowed down as I approached the truck, and I tried to get a good look inside of the cab. But the windows were tinted, and it was very dark out, so it was like looking into a black void. I also noticed that both the truck and the trailer were completely black. After passing the truck, I sped up and returned to my original speed. I didn't want to go too fast in case a trooper was hiding out somewhere, tagging passing cars. As I continued down the road, I kept thinking back to that strange truck I saw. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was in some kind of danger. Perhaps it was just my overactive imagination. Damn it, get a hold of yourself. It was just a trucker counting sheep on the side of the road. Saying it out loud did not make it any more convincing. There was something off about that truck. As I was about to turn down another corner, I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine revving up behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror as a pair of headlights came up fast behind me. I panicked and pressed down on my gas pedal, but my car was nowhere near fast enough to outrun the truck. The headlights were now directly behind me, practically blinding me. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I knew that there was something up with that truck, but now I had to do everything I could to get away from it. But the road was narrow, with no side streets or exits in sight. I was trapped out here, with this massive 18-wheeler right behind me. Suddenly, a hidden trooper didn't sound too bad. As we continued down the road, the truck eventually slowed down and stayed a safe distance behind me, still not making any attempts to pass me. The truck then flicked off its headlights. Oh, hell no. I immediately sped up, looking into my rearview mirror. I could make out the vague silhouette of the truck getting further and further away as I floored it down the highway until it disappeared from view. When I finally arrived home safely, I parked my car in the driveway and went inside, making sure that all my doors and windows were locked. I was exhausted. Nothing takes it out of you like being afraid for your life out on a dark highway. I just wanted to get some sleep and put this entire thing behind me. About an hour later, I was woken up by the unmistakable sound of an idling engine coming from outside. Half asleep, I got up and looked out my window. I became fully awake once I saw what was parked outside. A black semi-truck parked in the road outside of my house. Not only was I terrified from my previous encounter, but what was equally jarring was that this massive truck was in a residential area. I have no idea how that driver maneuvered down the narrow streets. This was the first time I got a good look at the truck. It had no commercial markings on it whatsoever, so there was no chance of me calling a number to let the company know that one of their drivers is a psychopath with a bad case of road rage. Also, I never got a good look at the driver's tags, but I imagine they would have read, "Beating you." I mentally could not handle seeing the truck outside of my house. I just remember saying, "No," and crawling back into bed. I didn't have the energy to deal with this insane shit. I just remembered hearing the truck pulling away as I drifted off to sleep. To this day, I'm still not sure if the driver somehow found out where I lived, or if it was just a very vivid nightmare. The next morning, I considered calling the police to report the strange encounter, but honestly, what were they going to do? There was no damage to my car, and there was no proof of what happened out there on the highway. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I became severely paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder and freaking out every time I saw a dark-colored truck. One day I was walking back from the grocery store and I saw a black semi parked on the side of the road. After nearly having a panic attack, I was put at ease once I saw the commercial markings on the side of its trailer. I realized that it was just another semi-truck with a black paint job. What happened to me that night was terrifying, but the fear that it caused me was taking over my ability to be rational. After a while, I could not allow it to control me anymore, and I eventually had to move on with my life. It's been years, but I still think about that black semi-truck from time to time. Ultimately, this experience has taught me to trust my instincts and to be extremely cautious when driving alone on remote roads. I still wonder who was behind the wheel of that truck and what their intentions were.